Are you alright?
It's probably just us now.
I'll back you up. And with me around, what could go wrong?
Resident Evil.
Albert Wesker chills in a lab with his boy, watching an 18-year-old girl traipse around with an ex-military lieutenant. I guess this means the virus has escaped the giant animal facility and poured onto the mountains of Raccoon City. He decides he's gotta finish the research of the virus by leading Team Stars Alpha to another conveniently located mansion. But first he's gotta stop the Russians. It's some guy from an anime who does a complex summoning jutsu to call a gay Morpheus into battle. He manages to get away though, the pillars of corporate capitalism proving too mighty for Comrade Cloud. Meanwhile, Rebecca enters the mansion having prophetic nightmares about her future.
Hey, I just realized DC and Damien aren't talking about Breaking Bad for once.
Hey, don't go there, Chris.
Yo, that shit's ahead of its time.
It's a goddamn masterpiece.
She finds Richard. They don't do so hot. While she contemplates the direction her life is taking, Wesker, with all of his brilliant intelligence, convinces Team Stars to remain in the mansion.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
I wanna die. Resident Evil was released in 1996 for the original PlayStation. Resident Evil was released in 2002 for the GameCube and ported again to the Wii in 2008. Resident Evil was released in 2006 for the Nintendo DS. Resident Evil was released in 2015 for 7th and 8th generation consoles, except for the Wii U and PC. In terms of release order, it's the 1st and 5th mainline games to hit store shelves. One borrowed concepts from an old game called Sweet Home.
What's up, MTV? Like this coat? White Panda.
To create an action game with a horror setting. Combine that with limited resources and the survival horror concept came about. The other was probably the single greatest port of a game ever created. Both incarnations have their standard ports to different hardware, the original being scaled down to take on the go, and the remake being scaled up for the better and for the worse. Part of this review is going to be highly critical. The other part is going to be a tutorial on how to suck dick. We follow the misadventures of two Special Forces agents in some bumfuck mansion out in the middle of nowhere. Chris Redfield has immense strength. Okay? And Jill is a highly intelligent agent who has common sense.
Oh god, what did I do now?
Can you survive the horror?
You saved me!
Yeah.
Solve the hair-raising puzzles throughout the mansion? Turn out the lights, lock the doors, and hey, did you know if you train with the Nintendo Power subscription, you'll get a smashing free gift? If you're seeing this video in the future, kids, I'm making this because I'm dead inside. The game was unique in that it heavily relied on pre-rendered backgrounds to substitute a fully 3D environment. See, Generation 5 was a weird time. Everyone was either trying to make a two-dimensional concept work in 3 dimensions, or try their very own awkward game idea in 3D.
I hate this shit.
The whole draw of this generation being finally getting to explore worlds in a way that had never been done before. But this usually meant that everything looked kinda... yeah. The mansion has a certain level of detail that would have been hard for these early 3D systems to pull off. Rooms with a bunch of dead animals in them, a storage room with a bunch of boxes and crates, a simple bathroom, but the hot tub has a towel hanging out of it, got the rug on the floor and the stuff on the sink. All things that would be easily doable the following generation. Pre-rendered backgrounds of the PS1 hit a level of visual fidelity that was out of its normal range, so to speak. All it had to do was produce a simple 3D map, lay out very simplistic 3D objects, and coat it with a nice layer of paint. The only complex figures it had to worry about were the character and enemy models. Now look, I don't program. The police showed up to make sure I wasn't learning how to read and write when I took an Intro to Java course.
I don't know much about computers other than the one we...
But it looks like the PS1 models go through a lot of change based on their distance from the camera. Hard to notice on the game's native resolution, but you'd think this type of low poly compromise wouldn't have to be made for this game. The DS port of this version has muddier looking pre-rendered backgrounds due to the lower resolution, but the much nicer and more consistent looking character models. The GameCube port has a nice updated look with revamped pre-rendered scenes, mirroring what would eventually be possible for 7th gen hardware. Now in standard definition, the models blend nicely into the backgrounds. The remastered port does little to clean up these images, however, making the more detailed models stick out from muddy looking environments. Like I said, the pre-rendered style lets a console hit above its usual mark in terms of visuals. An 8th gen game built with pre-rendered backgrounds should look insane, but even character models from a game where everything is 3D modeled look better than the ones from the remastered port. I know I can't expect them to rebuild Resident Evil, yet again, from the ground up for every single port, but the first transition from the PS1 to the GameCube was the kind of port that just never happens. Crash Trilogy. The one that people think of in their head. Spyro the Dragon. It could have been just another simple port, like Resident Evil 2 or Resident Evil 3, but it took full advantage of current gen hardware at the time. I'd really like to see a current generation demonstration of the style since full 3D environments are starting to get crazy amounts of detail in them. Maybe it can look like this across the board. All the technical aspects mentioned in Zero remain true here, save a few things. Tank controls are your only option of movement unless we're talking about the remastered version. The 180-degree turn doesn't exist on the original, but does for every other version, including the DS. The DS steals the knife concept from Resident Evil 4 and just has it as a base part of the character. You don't need to waste an inventory slot to manually equip it. Your character just whips it out and shanks a guy at the push of a button. Instead of just dropping items on the floor, items are stored into a magic box which will transfer them to any room the box appears in, unless you decide to deactivate that feature with a certain game mode. This is normal. This is not normal. Save these things, carry over the technical analysis from RE0, and you have my analysis for this game. So let's just get to the good part.
Wow!
Ha! It seems like this bulletproof jacket is pretty strong.
It's all the good part, who the fuck am I kidding? Now how does the story go? One night in 1998, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and Albert Wesker are chased by dogs into a mansion. Or was it Chris, Jill, and Wesker? If Jill was the star of the show, then the game was on little baby mode by default, until the game was ported and you could basically choose the difficulty. Going off to look for Chris, or Jill, you basically had to stumble around a mansion, a guest house, some tunnels underground, and a secret lab. The mansion was the main area, which had to be explored in separate chunks, 2 at the least, in order to complete the game. Dwelling in its halls were dead guys, dead dogs, birds, bees, and bitches. Its main elements are simplistic lock and key puzzles with clunky combat thrown in there to raise tensions. Let's start with the mansion segment. The mansion has a simple initial goal in order to pass to the next section. Find 4 things, or 4 things as the blacks like to call it, so you can unlock a door. I'm probably a racist. Originally getting these things requires pushing buttons under a picture, pushing statues, running past a giant snake, and shoving things in a tiger's face. This was changed to pushing buttons under a picture, pushing statues, running past a giant snake, and killing a plant. But no. The way you arrive to these things, or things, is through finding some sort of key to place in some sort of lock. Sometimes the key is shaped like a key. Sometimes it's shaped like mulch. Sometimes it's shaped like sheet music.
That sounded like Moonlight Sonata.
You're taking some kind of object to use somewhere in order to unlock another object to use somewhere to unlock something else. I know I have a tone of voice, but I'm not saying it's a bad thing or criticizing its simplistic nature. It's just kind of what it is. And this is sadly how I sound all the time. When you're exploring for the first time, you don't really see the importance of the things you pick up. Then you just kinda work your way around every single door looking for the next thing you can interact with. The zombies and combat are there to induce another layer of decision making, and gets better the more you know about the game. At first it's simple. Do I use ammo to make the current room safe to explore? Is this a place I think I'll need to come back to? How easily can I avoid these enemies? Do the cops really see me looking at that white woman? It'd be too easy if you just had to run around an empty house seeing what object unlocks what thing. If that's all there was, you'd be playing a simple point-and-click adventure game. Only it loads slower. The puzzles in themselves aren't difficult, it's just the layout that creates the struggle. The keys can be spread out fairly far away from their locks, sometimes being on opposite ends of the mansion. It's like most of the keys. The remake stretches out the mansion segment by occasionally just breaking the key you need in half. The sheet music to play the piano now requires 2 pages to combine into a usable key. You get a jewelry box, but then you need another thing to open it, or maybe you just need to solve another puzzle on the key itself to make it turn into a usable key. This stuff's occasional. Remake usually does the right thing, and adds brand new puzzles, usually fucking with your knowledge of how things are supposed to be. At least that's how it's planned. I played Remake first and saw the ways Remake tried to fuck veterans of the OG. Things you had to use before for significant items become a middle finger through your urethra. It gets your hopes up, letting you think you can save Richard only to have it taken away. The crests, which were essential before, become essentially meaningless since they're only for an optional gun. Optional puzzles become mandatory. Mandatory puzzles become optional. One useful door breaks down when you use it too many times. The zombies you kill come back to sell you life insurance. And if you're on a New Game Plus, Forest Law fucks your life. It's a game of resource management the first time, but the following times are an efficiency test. Your worries shift from, do I have enough to feed my goddamn kids, to how fast can I get the fuck out before Tanisha realizes I'm not just out buying cigarettes. You suddenly know when to swap weapons, how to move so that door breaks at the optimal time, how to solve puzzles to avoid making trips to the item box. It's satisfying watching that time drop the more you go at it. But this aspect only applies if replays are your thing. Resident Evil on both accounts is about a 2-hour game, plus if you're striving for perfection. If you're the one and done type of fellow, you'll miss out on some of the game's charm. The multiple endings, the way you can save or lose comrades, the things you can do to skip bosses. Replays have to be something you're down with in order to get the max bang for your buck. So Chris, or Jill, or Detective Isaac Washington,
what's up, motherfucker?
Get the 4 things, or things. Jill's thankful that a god among men is watching out for her.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
You okay?
Yeah, I was almost a Claire sandwich.
Does Barry tell everyone that story?
Chris meets a sleep-deprived Rebecca and is either carried by her or has to save her depending on your version. Isaac Washington saves himself. For the original game's next area, it's straight to the guest house. For the remakes, we need to make a trip to Lisa's house.
Why, Lisa? Why, Lisa? Please talk to me, please!
It's low-hanging fruit, I'm gonna do it. Fight me. For the sake of parallelism, let's follow Team Remake to Lisa's. We spin some chickens, maybe get a Magnum if you want, and find a square crank. So Lisa knocks us out, doesn't kill us, then tries to kill us. These guys should be dead here, but fuck it. So with a crank in hand, we can now progress with the original game. The guest house is rather short. Get the necessary keys, avoid the necessary bees, and flip some switches in the water to laugh at a useless shark. Once this is completed, you Scooby-Doo your way into a plant fight. The remake makes a fix to this area, giving the giant spider room an actual point besides the poster of ass. Originally, there is no reason to enter that room, since the red book is just in the guest room. It also houses clues to open a door for a boss skip. The shark room gets a nice upgrade from flopping fuckboys to a little puzzle with the water shutdown device. It's do or die. Good for tension, and bad for speedrunning since one of the elements of this puzzle is always randomized. Since Jill is a perfect know-it-all, she can choose to fight the boss or poison it. In the original game, Barry always has to rescue her. In Remake, she's only rescued if she poisoned the plant. Chris just flip-flops. In the remake, you can skip the poison, fight it, and come out like a fucking G. In the original game, you always have to get captured so Rebecca can save you by poisoning the plant. Honestly, Rebecca is just more useful in the original.
Oh! I can't believe it! Are you okay?
Yeah.
Hey, remember when Adam, shot Samus with a gun that made her suit completely useless? It just fucking destroys her, leaves her crying like a little bitch. Why does nobody else have that gun? Why don't the pirates just go all out in trying to steal that gun? Look what it does to her. Everyone runs into Wesker. Then we head off for a second sweep of the mansion. Mansion 2, as it's called, just requires you to find a battery to proceed. But there's also important wolf and eagle medals. For the remake, you need the medals and the fancy emblems. The first time it's pretty easy to just take the battery and head onto the caves. This is what I like about the game's setup in general. It's perfectly okay with letting you progress while missing key items. No one's gonna give you a little hint, wink, wink. I think there's something more to do here. You are fully responsible to keep the layout in your head. Just because you can progress doesn't necessarily mean that you should right away. Besides the inclusion of the new key that opens the door formerly opened by the helmet key, Remake adds another Save Rebecca moment. It requires you going through that busted door to kill a hunter. It's a little inconvenient to your route to save her, which is probably the point. If you had Forest Law chasing you before, he inexplicably disappears for hunters to take his place. Besides that, yeah. Battery, snake, medals, emblems, MO discs if you want them. Oh yeah, the MO disc room in the original is broken in Remake. That's another fuck you change. Anyway, once your second sweep is done, you go to the caves. In the original game, it's your segue to the lab. In Remake, it's your segue to love. You find Enrico, another crank, and dodge boulders. If you're Remake Jill, this is where Barry will leave you to die, whereas before it was in the mansion. Both iterations then hit the same notes on dodging 2 boulders, killing a spider, and fucking with the statue. That's all they share though. Remake adds the elevator and another Lisa segment to change things up. It's good tension trapping you in a room with that soulless harpy, and good for building on Lisa's history. I've been glossing over the story elements in favor of game design, but some of the shit you find here is pretty fucking depressing. Just normal workers and researchers losing their humanity, or coming to terms with their zombification. For the slow pace that you're likely to take on your first try, it's very good for building dread, until it decides to shoot itself in the foot in the most hilarious way. There's a pretty big dissonance between the writing of the files and the writing of the cutscenes.
What happened?
You were bitten by a poisonous snake. Are you okay?
Anyway, we'll follow Team Remake for a little bit since they have one teeny-weeny thing to do before entering the secret lab. It requires getting a jewelry box to get part of a key so we can combine it with the other half of a key so we can head through this gate. We then kill a little mutated girl that wanted nothing more than to find her mommy. No. Here, Jill will team up with Barry.
Fuck! Calm down, I didn't want to.
Chris will team up with Wesker. Perfect. Once you push 4 blocks and have 2 medals, you can head up to the lab and meet up with Team OG. The original game and remake roughly play out the same way. Use the computer to unlock some rooms so that you can turn on an elevator for the Tyrant fight. The difference in remake is the addition of nitroglycerin, which turns a simple puzzle that merely required a button press to another do-or-die situation. The simplicity of the original lab is made up for, in my opinion, by the MO disc. See here, there's only 1 to find. The others are spread out in the mansion and the caves. In Remake, 2 are found here, and only 1 is found elsewhere in the mansion. This was probably to fuck with people again if anything, but I like the original setup and having them spread out in significant locations. Anywho, power comes on, and Resident Evil continues to be Resident Evil.
Tyrant! Chris? Stop it.
I'm a sucker for this shit. So Tyrant dies, and depending on your choices, the lab will either go boom, or you'll have an uneventful helicopter ride into the sunrise. If you were Mr. Goody Two-Shoe saves everyone, you get a second Tyrant fight. With that, Jill saves herself because she's selfish, Chris saves everyone because he's selfless, Isaac Washington becomes Jill, and you're done. A survival horror classic. A fucking masterpiece remake that nearly improves upon its source material in every conceivable way, a classic that makes more improvements than it needed to make, and a cash grab PC port I'll probably choose over the GameCube because it has widescreen, my control preferences, and the ability to skip the door loading thing. Oh yeah, that. Perfectly acceptable. A way to pull in players that was so effective, dumbasses will still defend it even when it's not necessary. It's not necessary here. I don't care if it's trying to catch the spirit of the original. Make a change, like all the other changes you did. There you go. Fuck tradition. Mod it. It's easy. I shouldn't have to, but it's easy. Peace, niggas. But seriously, just how does she win anything? There's a fuck Samus gun.